Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
Thank you. You just can't beat Kent Gosselin for a great introduction. I'd like to thank you, Kent, and I'd like to thank everybody here at the Rotary. And particularly, I'd like to thank the person who was in charge of the billboard. I've never had my picture on a billboard before, so I was so excited that this morning I went out and I wanted to see it for myself to see if it actually existed, and it did. And I was out there kind of taking selfies, with the duck lips and all this stuff. And as I was there, I heard a, "Excuse me, sir, excuse me," and I looked, and it's the Motorist Assistance Patrol that came, and they wanted to know if I needed help, and I was like, "Believe me, I need help, but you guys can't give me the type of help that I need." So, and then I said, "Well, you know who I am? Look at, No, I didn't do that. Although I thought about it. No, I didn't think about it. Where the clicker is, okay. So let me get this. So what I'm here to talk to you all about today is what you probably heard a lot about, this whole concept of self-driving vehicles, and when are they going to be here, and what do they do, and it's discussed a lot, and we've done some work at LSU as far as research. And when they asked me to come and speak, they said, "Well, look, make it interesting and make it entertaining for the guests, and also really make it something that's good information that they might be able to use." So what I'll do is I'll start off by talking about what the technology is. So if you're not familiar with it, basically autonomous vehicles are vehicles effectively that will be able one day to drive themselves. And what they're going to rely on is basically, this is a very complicated looking picture, is basically a bunch of sensors that are located at different places around the car. And what they do, in most simple terms, is they make basically an internal map of what is surrounding that vehicle. Not just immediately next to it or behind it or to the sides, but what's up ahead, because that's what's most important if you're going to drive fast. And what they do is they process this and they send instructions to the controls of the vehicle, which is effectively the accelerator, the brake, and the steering. And the idea is that what they're going to do is they're going to figure out what these objects are and try to avoid them as much as possible, or to be able to act in a way that they will bring efficiencies, let's say, to the road network. And I'll talk about those in a second. So the US DOT has defined 5 levels of autonomy. And the ones that I show in green here, level 0 to level 2, are basically things that we already have right now. To a certain degree, we have the other ones too, but they're not street ready just yet. So level 0 obviously is us driving the car. Level 2, the cruise control, auto braking, those have been around not just recently, but you can go back as far as almost to the birth of vehicles, and you would see a lot of these technologies. Then level 2, which is where we're at right now in terms of being on the street, is basically it's helping the driver to do some of those tasks. Now, some vehicles right now are at level 3, and even you could argue level 4. And you've heard about some of these where people have actually fallen asleep at the wheel, and they've driven 60 or 70 or 80 miles, and the car has basically steered itself and driven itself, and they've either fallen asleep or passed out. Maybe they've had the recreational 12-pack on the way home, or whatever the case. But this is not really legal. There's no legal framework, so we're really not ready for that right now. The second, so the idea of these, and this is what's important, it's more than just driving your car or your vehicle driving itself. What it really is going to do is, among the goals, is to reduce errors, really to eliminate crashes. So people like Kent or like the billboard lawyers or whatever, I don't know what they're going to do for a living if this all kind of comes into being, because in theory we would have no crashes because vehicles would be able to avoid themselves. But it's more than that. One of the other big things is how it's going to mobilize individuals who are currently unable to drive. And the main categories that are discussed a lot of times are the elderly, the poor, and disabled. Then what it's also supposed to do is to make for more efficient vehicle utilization. That's at least one of the ideas that's discussed, and we'll get to that in a second too. So the idea might be that vehicles will no longer be owned by individuals, possibly, but transportation will be a service. And these vehicles, if like you guys all came here, you drove yourself, and then you're going to drive back to your office or wherever it is that you're going. But the idea, if we had self-driving cars, you might hit an app on your phone, and a vehicle, not owned by you, not owned by anybody necessarily, but you might subscribe to a service, let's say, and that vehicle would come pick you up and then drop you off at work, and then it would go do something else. So the other idea is that it's at least envisioned to be able to reduce environmental impact. So, and this can come in a variety of different ways. And I have a question mark here because when I talk about kind of the two paradigms of where things might go with self-driving vehicles, it actually might make more of an environmental impact depending on how they're used. But if we have these pooled vehicles, in theory, we would have less vehicles needed. There is if you look at the utilization of your vehicle, right now you're sitting here, your vehicles are parked outside, at least if you drove yourself here. And that's also true when you go back to work, that's also true when you go home tonight. So your vehicles are basically only used 5% of the time, and they sit idle 95% of the time. But you're paying for insurance, you're paying for maintenance, you're paying for upkeep, all those things that are the costs of ownership. In some cases, you're paying for parking. If we can eliminate that, we would also be able to reduce the cost of transportation. Then the other thing that it would do, in theory, is make infrastructure more efficient. So we would be able to use the space of lanes. So we all look out at I-10 and it's congested a lot of times during the day. But if you could pack cars in very closely together, one by one by one, and even side by side, in theory, you could move 7, 8, 10, 20 times as much traffic in the same amount of time and the same amount of space as you could if you were having drivers. And I'll show you some examples of that. The second part of this technology, and a lot of this stuff already exists right now, is what we call connected vehicles. And connected vehicles are just basically able to communicate with other vehicles, what we call vehicle-to-vehicle or V2V. Then the second part of that is vehicle-to-infrastructure, or V2I. So as you're approaching a traffic signal, your vehicle would alert the signal to let the signal know that you are about to arrive, and that signal, in theory, would turn green for you, and you would just progress throughout the network. It's not as easy as it sounds, not technologically, but trying to balance the needs of traffic. And we'll get to that in a little bit too. But the other thing that it would do is if you could marry this with self-driving technology, you could have a platooning of vehicles and a coordination of signals. So effectively, it wouldn't be you driving by yourself and the car in front of you and the car behind you driving by themselves. But what it would do is it would chain you all together. And in theory, it would be like NASCAR, where you could drive bumper to bumper to bumper at 70 or 80 miles per hour. And if you do the quick math on that, that will increase your road capacity by 20-fold if you're able to do that. The problem with driving as we know it right now is really the driver. So a lot of people talk about congestion. They say, "Doggone it, I'm calling the DOT or city parish or you knucklehead professor, and I want to know why there's always congestion out there," as if they're not causing the congestion for somebody else. So everybody looks at driving kind of in a selfish way. Not bad that they're selfish, but nobody realizes that every time you go through a signal on a green light, somebody else has to stop. So if you're not there, then they can go. So you're doing people a favor, in theory, by not driving. So the idea is how can we actually make that work better? And you can go on, whether it's safety or whatever the conditions are. Kind of the weak link, if you will, a lot of times in vehicular or highway transportation is the driver. They are the ones who are responsible for a lot of the inefficiencies. And then the other thing about connected vehicles is you can get a lot of information. So what you can get is information of not only what the road conditions are where you are right now, but where the road conditions might be at your destination or near your destination an hour from now. So you can have this anticipatory guidance where it's going to route you around or route you such that you better utilize the system. So during rush hour, everybody doesn't run up to Florida Boulevard or to I-10 to go home. But these cars could get routed in ways, and you wouldn't even be doing the driving, so you wouldn't know. But time-wise, it would get you to where you need to go faster and safer. So right now, for connected vehicles, and this is either in testing or in deployment right now for the US DOT, they have three main areas for connected vehicles, and their safety, obviously crash reduction. And the idea there is to decrease conflicts, not just between vehicles, but between vehicles and pedestrians. Also, to have emergency vehicle response and preemption, so that with good communication, first responders can be deployed and they would be safely protected when they are out on the road. And then you can also have things like turning and passing assistance. So if you are about to turn, make a left turn in front of opposing traffic, what it would do is, through these communication, it would stop either your car or the car opposing you, so those types of collisions wouldn't happen. Then there's the mobility aspect, which is keeping people moving. So we talked about this, the congestion reduction, to improve travel time reliability. So when we talk about reliability, one of the frustrating things to a lot of drivers is not necessarily the congestion, but one day there is congestion, then there's not, then it's over here, then it's over here. If we could have a way to make it more reliable from a business standpoint for deliveries, for all these types of things, that would also be a much better situation. We could also use it, as I talked about, for signals, for speed uniformity. The more that vehicles are all traveling at the same speed, there's less conflicts, there's less lane changing. That makes it safer too. Queue warning, this happens a lot in construction zones where you come up to stop traffic ahead of you, and immediately you got to hit the brakes. Some people do, some people don't. So all that goes together, and then there's the environmental component, which is trying to improve air quality, which is big in Baton Rouge, and always to minimize wasted fuel. So when we look at the primary players in this, they're both from the public sector and the private sector, like a lot of transportation. So the public sector is going to look at infrastructure. What is the infrastructure we need to operate these types of systems? The legal and regulatory frameworks for how all this stuff is going to operate. The technology is pretty close to already existing, but there are really no laws or no regulations that actually kind of dictate how it should be used, what's safe, what's not safe. If you look at self-driving vehicles, one of the difficulties is that it is computer code. So if, let's say, a little kid runs out into the street and the vehicle cannot stop, the vehicle has to decide, do I run over this kid or do I plow the vehicle into the tree and maybe kill the occupants? It's not going to be a person who's deciding this. This is a computer that's deciding. It's got one or the other of those choices. And how did those choices get made? What's right, what's wrong? And that's part of, the moral and ethical part of this as well. And that's when we're talking about also the supporting of the social good. How are these going to be used, and what does the society want from these types of vehicles? And obviously the private sector, they're going to provide the technology, they're going to provide the vehicles, infrastructure, congestion. Now let's talk about this for a second. There's two main models of what they think the future of this might be. And they is all these people who I hear talk, or I talk with a lot. And they said the first model for connected and autonomous vehicles might be just like we have right now. So this is, you would go out and you would buy a vehicle and it would just drive itself. And it would be really no different whether you came to this meeting and you go back to work, you go home later, you would drive your car. Well, in the first model, you would just, if your car would drive itself. And there wouldn't be maybe much change other than some of those other efficiencies that we talked about. The second is the pooled model. And the pooled model is such where a lot of people are pushing for this, where transportation is sold almost as a subscription service. So vehicles, in theory, may not be owned in the future, Vehicles, your transportation could be something that would all be on an app. So if you wanted to use a vehicle, you would call for this. Now, one of the problems with that is which one of those may be better or worse for society and the environment. Because in theory, if you had a bunch of vehicles that were out there driving autonomously, that could actually cause much more vehicles, because you would all of a sudden also have delivery vehicles, and maybe your garbage truck, maybe ambulances. All these things would actually be driving themselves, and we would have twice as many vehicles, because now instead of going out to eat, you would just sit in your living room and you would call up, and boom, this car would show up with your Raising Cane's or whatever it is that you ordered. So there has to be some kind of a workable business model that comes out of this, and I think a lot of that is being worked out, and it could be a little bit of both. It could be neither. It could be something different that people are not even anticipating. So some of the changes to consider is that if this stuff, or when this stuff, it's not a matter of if, but when this stuff comes into play, it's going to fundamentally change things like vehicle design. What are vehicles going to look like? And I have a couple of pictures of what they might look like. It's going to change employment. So are we going to have people who drive for a living? Maybe some, but a lot of those jobs may be now replaced with automation. Urban design. So do we need roads? Do we need traffic signals? Do we even need stop signs if these vehicles are able to operate autonomously? And I'll show you some of the research that we did to show you examples of that in a second. Delivery and pickup business models. Construction. There's even talk that when we talk about construction vehicles, dump trucks that are running around, you don't need drivers for them, but they could operate on their own. And then how we fundamentally spend our time traveling, and our commutes and our school drop-offs. So instead of you waking up early, making breakfast, taking your kids to school, and then having to leave work early or whatever, pick them up, no, you just hit your button on your app, and the vehicle shows up, you put your kids on it, give them a kiss goodbye, and there they go. And then they come home the same way. And I hear Kent laughing over there, but what's funny is that in a lot of ways, people used to think about elevators like this. I don't know if anybody is old enough to know that elevators were always operated by a person. And they didn't let people hop on elevators. The person would sit there and he would press the buttons. Well, with better automation, they got rid of the person sitting on the elevator. But a lot of people didn't want to get on the elevator. Like, well, I'm not getting on there. There's no guy to press the button. And they're like, well, you can press the button yourself. I'm like, I'm not pressing the button myself. I got to have a guy there. So slowly, it's a change of mentality. If you look at airplanes, as I understand airplanes, basically they only need pilots to get them out to the runway. But other than that, taking off, landing, flying, changing routes and all these things is basically automated. None of us really has a problem with that. And they've been automated for a long time. So a lot of these things are not new. It's just new to us because we've never seen it on roads before. And even sleeping and eating. So let me show you some of these pictures. So in the most simple case, your self-driving vehicle might look like that, where you'd have swivel seats. So it really it's not that much different. What's interesting here is a steering wheel. You could slide it back to either side or just get rid of it if you want to, but you could sit and chat. As the vehicle is operating itself, you could hold business meetings. And again, there's that empty space. And so you can envision how you might be able to better utilize your time getting to and from places you need to go if you can take care of it while you are in that commute. These things like this are already being used. These are, at certain airports, they have self-driving buses, and they're very simple, and they operate at low speed. But basically, this is taking you to your rent-a-car from the terminal. Now, you can say, well, look, we already have buses, but you need a driver. You could say, well, look, we already have trains, but trains are fixed and they require a lot of very expensive infrastructure. So, and once they're fixed. Something like this, you can be much more nimble. Wherever a vehicle can drive, you can have your self-driving vehicle can drive on that route. And then something like this. So you have a person and you're sleeping. So maybe they're driving to their business meeting, and so the car doesn't have a steering wheel, doesn't have anything. It's got a little toilet, maybe even a shower, maybe a place. It's just like an RV, and you basically call for this, you hop in it, and then the next morning you wake up, you're at your business meeting, and you're ready to go, and you've been able to drive it, and it may or may not have been easier than flying. Now, when we look at commercial vehicle operations, this is what the 18-wheeler of the future might look like. Again, there's no need for a cab there, and a lot of the exchange or the intermodal exchange of trailers and freight can be done without people, and you would have the cab part of this. You could have it designed for different things, whether it's for long-haul trucking or for maneuvering in tight quarters of cities. Here's another interesting thing from Volvo, and this is a self-driving garbage truck. And not only is the garbage truck self-driving, even the garbage cans are self-driving. So if you watch the video, these little cans, it's like Wall-E, they'll kind of cruise out and they'll hop in the truck. And then there's a little elevator that takes them up to the second floor here, and then the next one kind of comes over it. And then when they get to the garbage place or whatever, they all hop out and dump themselves, hop back in, and then they get re-delivered back. And it's funny that you're, like, Kent's laughing, but it's wide open. I mean, if you can imagine it, this is the stuff that we're thinking about. So this is an interesting picture. This is actually from 2001. This is what we call a self-driving platoon. What you can't see is all the people with their hands out of the window. So again, this technology is old. This is 20-year-old technology. And then they're talking about these basically queued freight 18-wheelers that would drive on the road. And here's what I was talking about. This happens to be a parking lot, but even parking garages. This almost looks like parking at LSU, where they have a 3-foot parking stall. I can't open my door on either side, but I won't have to anymore. But you could envision that this could be I-10 as well. And it could be I-10 during rush hour driving at 80 miles an hour. So you could pack in 3 or 4 or 5 times as many cars and have them drive 3 or 4 times as fast. And you could move more people, and that's a good thing, right? Not necessarily, because you're using more fuel, you're creating more emissions. So then the thought is, well, we'll have electrification, and it'll be cleaner. Well, you still got to generate electricity. And maybe by then, whatever, we'll have renewable sources. So can 2 lanes become 4? So we don't need to keep adding capacity. We just kind of mush more cars in on the road, if you will. Okay, so when is this going to happen? I have no idea. But as I said, the technology exists. If the lawyers could agree, I think it would go much faster. But again, the government moves much slower than technology. So we're not quite there yet. But within 5 years, what's being talked about, and some of this stuff already exists, not in wide use, but in very, very, very small, limited spaces. Kind of taxi and delivery services. There are taxi and delivery services right now that are fully autonomous in small sections of cities where it's being tested. A lot of this stuff is happening in California, and where the Yankees are from, not the New York Yankees, the Detroit Yankees, because we make all the cars. So they're investing tons, GM, Ford, Chrysler, all those companies. And what's sad in a way is that overseas, they're jumping ahead of us in this already. And they're jumping ahead of us because there's a lot more need. There's a lot less regulation in a way. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But as Kent said, I go to China a lot. They are all over this because they have 4 or 5 times as many people as we do. They have cities of 25, 26 million people, and they are congested almost 24 hours a day. They don't want to wait for this, and they want to make an omelet. They may break a few eggs, but it's a little bit of a different paradigm. Again, you don't have the billboard lawyers in Beijing the way you do necessarily in Baton Rouge, and I know those guys are good guys. But got to make a living. So no, it's fine. Like I think it's good that you got a helicopter landing pad on your office because I got no problem with that. So I need that. All right, so. Basically, the whole idea is we're gonna go in increments, and we're gonna have a little bit of this cooperative platooning, I think, where the vehicles are going to work together, and then slowly they're going to evolve a situation where they're going to become more and more autonomous. So the question is why not now? Well, I think a lot of people are asking, what is it that we want as a society? What do we want self-driving cars to be? We got to make sure that the public policy supports that. And we got to figure out what the model is going to be. Is it going to be an individual ownership? Is it going to be a mobility service model? It's going to be something in the middle, a little bit of both. So now let me show you some examples of what this might look like in actual operation. So the first thing is what we call virtual traffic control. So what we could use, we can marry these two technologies of self-driving vehicles and of this vehicle-to-vehicle communication to make to form platoons, meaning groups of vehicles, and they would adjust their speed to coordinate arrivals and departures at intersections. So you would have intersecting vehicle streams that might look something like this, and this is always kind of funny, and everybody laughs, they're like, oh my God, this is crazy. We would never want this in America. This is kind of what they have in some of these countries overseas, but if you notice, nobody gets killed. Nor does anybody get hurt, but there's ways to make this more efficient. So, all right, so you all laugh at this, and you say, okay, that's funny, that's not what we want. We want close regulation and traffic signals. We want what we're used to. Okay, we'll give you that. And then here's what you get. Oh! Is that better? I don't know. You tell me. You laughed at the other people. Nobody got hurt or killed in that. So what I'm saying is nothing is perfect. And so our research that we've done on this to look at so you could get rid of all stop signs and traffic signals. You don't need them. You don't need the electricity, you don't need the infrastructure, you don't need the construction. You can spend that money on something else because the vehicles will separate themselves. And if you can do this, it depends on, obviously, on traffic volume and the network configuration. Is it a grid? Are they crossing at angles? All these other things. And how many streets are there? And how often are there intersections? But we, in a research setting, and I can show you some of the videos on this. We're looking, 15% decrease in stops, 35% increase in speeds, 50% decrease in average queue lengths compared to traffic signal operation that's out there. Where a lot of people say, well, couldn't it be zero? Couldn't we have none of this? Well, again, remember, you're going this way, somebody else is coming this way, somebody else is coming the other way. So it's not as if you would never have to stop, but what we would do, mathematically, we would find a way to try to optimize that. And that's kind of what we do with traffic signals. Nobody likes our optimization, but look, when you're trying to slice the pizza that's only this big, and there's 50 people who want to eat the pizza, sometimes the pieces of pizza get pretty small. So, and I won't bore you with all this, but this was some of the simulations, and unfortunately this runs very slow. And you notice all the names here are all from China. So these are all the folks that I work with over in China because they're pouring millions, billions of dollars into this technology because the need is there. And I think some of the regulatory environment is the bar is a lot lower than it might be in the United States. And I'm not sure why this isn't playing, but that's okay. So the last thing I'll talk about here before I let you go, because I know your time is important, is this is something that we also did for the US DOT. So as Kent said, I've been working in evacuation planning and management for about 20-something years. Ever since I saw Hurricane George, I've been working with the DOT and the state police who have done a fantastic job. And Louisiana, without a doubt, is the world leader in being able to move more people in shorter amounts of time under emergency conditions than anywhere else in the country. And as much as we got kind of beaten down nationally in the media and stuff like that, Lord forbid if it ever happens in New York or Los Angeles or any other place, because they're not ready. And I do FEMA training classes on evacuation all over the place, and everybody thinks they're ready. They're not. We have a great plan here. But to enhance it, what they're saying is, well, geez, could we use some of these technologies even in an evacuation situation? So this is kind of going on right now, and a lot of people are saying, well, let's use this stuff. Well, first of all, it's not ready. But if you could, you could use it for things like this. You could give evacuation traffic information to better utilize the available capacity of the network, but you could also use it to find lodging, fuel, water, cash machines, and other things that are necessary for evacuees. And at a 50% penetration rate, and by penetration rate what we mean is 50% of the people who would have these technology, we were overwhelmingly able to decrease travel times to shelters, decrease congestion, decrease delay, travel time, fuel consumption, all these other things. And we're able, this is stuff that, that if it doesn't exist today, which it doesn't, the US DOT is pushing to get this deployed. What they need is a lot of more private sector buy-in and trying to get the private sector to really push a lot of these technologies. And there are a lot, like Waze and a lot of these apps. We work with those guys all the time because they're saying, well, what can we do to make these things better? So that is the end of my presentation. I can't believe I was able to get it done. I'm sorry about trying to give you a sip of water of a fire hose, but I hope, oh yeah, if you got questions, I can try to answer them.
Thank you. Just real quick, back to the autonomous car.
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to keep my Hemi Cuda 440, 550 horses?
I absolutely, in my book you will. Yeah, yeah.
So that's not going to be a problem.
Well, no, again, it depends on what society wants. You know, it's not just me, it's not a technology thing. I think you're going to see, it's going to be a slow evolution, and I think you're never fully, because there's cool people like you who want to drive your Hemi Cuda. Yeah, you know, and be bad maybe a little bit. So, yes, sir. Oh.
The question is, you were talking about that the boy or the woman or the
Yes.
on the bicycle.
Yes.
But you're talking about no street, no signal lights.
Mm-hmm.
What do they do when they get to an intersection?
Well, that's a great question. So the idea is if the vehicle is sensing them, that would be part of that equation. You're not going to run vehicles through an intersection, but if there are no pedestrians, or again, a lot of these technologies are still being developed. I don't know, maybe like as a pedestrian, you might have your cell phone. Your cell phone might broadcast a signal out to let surrounding vehicles know where you are, or the sensor would just project up ahead, and that it would know, it would alert. And the cool thing about it is there's this thing known as a traffic shockwave. And it's both when traffic starts and traffic stops. So if the first vehicle stops really hard, then the second vehicle stops, the third vehicle stops, fourth vehicle stops, all the way through. What happens a lot of times is that if you're the 14th vehicle, you don't know, and you slam into the back of the 13th vehicle. If all the vehicles are connected, that stuff would basically go at the speed of light. So when the first vehicle stopped, every other vehicle would stop or slow or speed up in that platoon. It'd be kind of almost like a train, if you will. So yes, but pedestrians, cyclists, all of that is huge. In fact, what's interesting is that a lot of the things that we find the most difficult, I don't know if anybody likes to parallel park here or if everybody hates it, but do any of you have parallel parking cars? You just hit on your key fob and it will park itself. And that is really easy because nothing is moving other than the car, and it can sense where everything is and it can move itself in there. Where the difficulty is these unpredictable environments, and that's where a lot of the research effort is going on now, and that would be one of them. Yes, sir.
So having driven in unpredictable environments, black ice,
Yes.
rain, all of those things, how does it pick up, how does it sense those, how does a car sense those types of environments?
The easy answer, I don't know, but because I've never looked at that part. I'm just being honest with you. I would think that just like there's rules of operation that say that we don't design roads for every condition. If it's black ice and those types of things, we tell people to slow down to a driving speed that's reasonable and prudent for the conditions. That would have to be coded into the vehicle, and there would have to be sensors or whatever within these vehicles. How they're going to do that, I don't know. That's more of a vehicle manufacturing thing than a policy. Yes, sir.
So everything that you described makes sense. Look, partially makes
Yes.
sense in an urban setting.
Yes.
Can you describe how this applies in America, where we have a huge,
Yes, vast
rural
open middle.
When they need to go to my camp in the middle of nowhere in Pensall Parish?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of the discussions I heard is actually it's a little bit easier because there is, other than, let's say a scenario where there's a lot less traffic, if any traffic, you're driving through an area, that is something that self-driving vehicles right now can do reasonably well, even at high speed, curves, what we call lane keeping. They can self-steer and brake and do those kinds of things. What they're thinking more globally is it will bring mobility to people who might not be as mobile in rural areas. So, grandma might be able to get to the store or get to her doctor appointment where she might not be able to do that now without the use of some kind of assisted transportation. So it's all over. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was asking more from the standpoint of, you're talking about going to like this communal model where
Yes. Yes.
So how does that
Well, that's one of the questions. I'm not saying we're going that way. I'm saying that's one of the things that's been discussed is this communal model. Again, I don't have that answer either. I don't have a lot of these answers. I'm just telling you what's out there. And as a society and as business leaders, you guys will drive this ultimately. I guess we have one more
last
question.
one.
Yes, ma'am.
Recently, of course, we had a Boeing that went down because of the computer malfunction. Several years ago, I'm not sure which car manufacturer had a brake failure where people were killed. I went to prison even though it wasn't his fault. And so my question here is, from a trust standpoint, I just bought a Lexus that stops if it gets too close. It has the lane driving stuff and all. And my husband turned it off because he said he could drive better than the car.
Yes.
My question is, where is the trust factor in knowing that it won't fail?
It's like the elevator, It's at some point, like when you get on an elevator, is there any guarantee it's not going to fall to the bottom? No, we don't know. In fact, I was in New York City last week and a guy got crushed in an elevator. People get killed in escalators. I'm not saying that it's foolproof at all, but I think that's what we're working towards. And what we can say is, well, okay, we're afraid. We're not going to do anything. We'll just let things, and then we'll let other countries all around the world become more efficient, and they become the business leaders, and we can kind of get left on the scrap heap. Look, we can be afraid, and we can not go to the moon. We cannot do a lot of these things, or we can keep pushing it. And we push it in a way that we're doing everything we possibly can, but as soon as they get the max 80 or whatever jet, I'll fly on it. I don't consider myself a daredevil, but I'm not going to be, sit in fear that, it might not work. So, I guess I'll pray a lot.
And on that note,
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.